There are few things lonelier than being a woman with no friends. It's not the kind of loneliness that makes noise. It doesn't crash into a room or beg for attention. It's quiet. It shows up on a Tuesday afternoon when no one checks in, or on your birthday when the phone stays silent. It lives in the pauses between conversations with coworkers, in the evenings spent scrolling through social media, watching the highlight reels of other people's lives, wondering why you weren't invited. It doesn't always hurt like a sharp wound. It's more like a dull ache, something that sits under the surface, asking questions you don't know how to answer. You start to wonder what's wrong with you. That's the first place the mind goes. It tells you that other women laugh together, cry on each other's shoulders, take weekend trips, and exchange good morning texts. So why not you? It whispers that something must be broken inside of you, even if you can't see the cracks, and that whisper becomes a loop, and that loop becomes a belief. Over time, the belief hardens into silence. You stop reaching out. You stop trying, because rejection becomes a ghost that sits too close. But here's the truth, one we rarely say aloud. Being without friends does not mean being without worth. Life doesn't always follow a predictable social script. Sometimes a woman has no friends because she had to move too many times, or because she gave all of herself to her family and left no room for herself. Sometimes she's been burned too many betrayals, too many friendships that demanded more than they gave. Sometimes she just doesn't fit the mold. Maybe she's quiet, maybe she's intense, maybe she loves deeply and that scared people away. And none of that makes her broken. It just makes her human. It's also important to admit that loneliness as a woman hits differently. Society teaches women to be nurturers, to build community, to be emotionally available. So when you don't have those connections, it's not just a personal ache. It feels like a social failure. You feel invisible in a world that praises female friendships in books, in shows, in everyday conversation. We've been taught that part of being a complete woman is being surrounded by sisters, best friends, a tribe. And when that's not your reality, the silence cuts deeper, but there's something else that happens in that silence. At first, it feels like emptiness, but if you sit with it long enough, if you stop trying to run from it or fill it with noise, you start to hear something underneath. You hear your own voice, the one you've been drowning out for years while trying to belong, trying to be liked, trying to be enough. That voice is quiet, but it's steady, and it begins to say, you are still here, you still matter. There is power in that. In being alone and not letting it crush you. In learning to enjoy your own company, even if the process is slow and uneven. In finding small joys that don't require an audience. In realizing that the absence of friendship does not mean the absence of connection. It just means your connections might be waiting in unexpected places or in a different season of your life. We don't talk enough about the strength it takes to wake up each day and live with that kind of loneliness and still choose to be kind, to work, to smile at strangers, to hope. That is not weakness. That is not failure. That is resilience. And while friendship is a beautiful part of life, it is not the only thing that makes life beautiful. You are not incomplete just because your circle is empty right now. Circles can expand. Lives can change. Hearts can heal even when it feels impossible. So if you are a woman with no friends, know this, your story doesn't end here. There's an unspoken rule in society that women are supposed to have friends, lots of them. We grow up seeing it in movies and television shows, reading about it in books, hearing it in conversations. From the outside, it seems like every woman is part of a tight, knit circle, laughing over coffee, planning birthday surprises, venting after work, holding hands through heartbreak. This idea isn't just encouraged, it's expected. And when you're a woman who doesn't have that, who walks through life largely alone, The weight of that expectation can feel crushing. People don't ask why you're lonely with compassion. They ask it with confusion, sometimes even judgment. How can you not have any friends? They ask, as if the answer will be some dramatic story, some flaw that explains everything neatly. They rarely consider that maybe life just happened. Maybe you lost people. Maybe you were excluded. Maybe you moved too many times to keep connections. Maybe people drifted and nobody bothered to swim back. The truth is rarely dramatic. Most of the time, it's just quiet. But what makes this harder is the stigma. Because in a world that celebrates connection, being a woman without friends becomes something to hide, something to be embarrassed about. If you admit to it, people look at you like you're unfinished, as if you're missing some key ingredient in your identity. You get labeled too quiet, too intense, too distant, too different, or worse, they pity you. And for many women, pity feels like the loneliest thing of all. The reality is, there's nothing wrong with a woman who has no friends. There is, however, something wrong with the way society sees her, the way we assign value based on social currency, the way we measure a woman's worth by how many people show up for her birthday, how many group photos she posts online, how many stories she's tagged in on a weekend. We confuse popularity with intimacy and social activity with emotional depth, but those things are not the same. And then there's the idea that a woman without friends must not be kind or likable, that she must be cold, rude, or distant. But that's not the truth for most. In fact, it's often the opposite. Many women without friends are deeply kind. They're the ones who feel too much, who care too deeply. They're the ones who got hurt and didn't know how to open up again. They're the ones who gave too much in past friendships and ended up drained, forgotten, or betrayed. So they stopped trying, not because they didn't want friends, but because they got tired of bleeding for people who didn't know how to stop the wound. We also don't talk about how hard it is to make friends as an adult. Life moves fast. People get busy. Relationships are built on convenience more than connection. Unless you work together, go to school together, or live nearby, the chances of forming meaningful friendships get smaller. And if you're not the kind of person who thrives in social gatherings, or who fits neatly into expected roles, the gap widens. It's not that you're unworthy of love or friendship. It's just that the world isn't set up to notice quiet souls anymore. So when you're a woman with no friends, and the world tells you that you should have them, that something's wrong with you if you don't, it becomes easy to internalize that message, to start believing that you're the problem, but you're not. You are still valuable, still whole, still deserving of connection. The number of people in your life does not determine your worth. And your story is not small just because it isn't being shared with a crowd. The truth is, having no friends right now doesn't mean you're unlovable. It just means your path looks different. And different is okay. At some point, after the silence has stretched too long and the unanswered messages no longer surprise you, there comes a moment of reckoning. When you're a woman with no friends, you reach a point where you have to make a choice: either let the loneliness define you, or begin to form a relationship with the one person who has always been there, yourself. This isn't a glamorous journey. It doesn't come with inspiring background music or sudden clarity. In fact, at first, it can feel like giving up, sitting at a cafe alone, walking through the park alone, eating dinner while the seat across from you stays empty. None of it feels like healing. It feels like failure, like isolation you never asked for. But slowly, something begins to shift. You start to notice your own thoughts a little more clearly. You begin to hear yourself, and in that stillness, you meet a woman who's been waiting for your attention, yourself. For so long, the focus was outward. You tried to belong, to be liked, to be accepted, to be invited. You wore the mask that made others comfortable. You watered yourself down to fit into spaces that never felt right. And now, without the noise of expectations, you can finally breathe. You begin to understand that solitude isn't punishment. It can be an invitation. An invitation to relearn who you are beneath all the versions you created to be enough for others. You start asking questions. What do I actually enjoy? What makes me feel safe? What do I believe about myself when no one else is telling me who I should be? It's uncomfortable, this peeling back of layers, but it's also freeing. Because when you finally begin to know yourself, you stop seeking others to fill that void. You stop begging to be seen. You realize that being alone and being lonely are not the same thing. You begin to create small rituals that remind you that you matter. You light a candle just for yourself. You cook a nice meal even when no one else is coming. You go for a walk not to distract yourself, but to be present with your own company. You read, you write, you sit in silence, and sometimes it still hurts, yes, but there are also moments when it doesn't. Moments when you laugh out loud at something only you noticed, and that laugh feels real. Moments when you feel peaceful for no reason at all. And in those moments, you begin to feel whole again. There is something profoundly powerful about becoming your own friend. It's not just about self-care or surface-level affirmations. It's about showing up for yourself on the days when no one else does. It's about learning how to comfort yourself when the world feels cold. It's about holding space for your pain without judgment and celebrating your joys even when no one else sees them. It's a quiet strength, a kind of resilience that doesn't get praised often, but it's real, and the beauty of this kind of friendship is that it doesn't require performance. You don't have to shrink, explain, or entertain. You get to be exactly who you are. And once you've built that relationship with yourself, you stop tolerating the kind of friendships that left you drained. You start to recognize red flags earlier. You protect your peace with more confidence. You begin to attract connections that are built on truth, not desperation. It's not that you no longer want friends, of course you do. Human connection is a deep need. But now, you know you don't need anyone to complete you. You're not waiting to be rescued. You're not trying to earn love through self-abandonment. You've already done the hardest work, choosing to love yourself when it felt like no one else did. That's the foundation where real, healthy friendship can grow. Not from emptiness, but from abundance. Not from fear, but from trust. So even if the silence hasn't broken yet, even if the invitations still haven't come, know that you've already begun the most important relationship of your life. And that matters. There's a story behind every woman who walks alone. And more often than not, it's not that she didn't want friends. It's that getting close to others felt like walking through a minefield. People see the surface, a quiet woman, a distant look, someone who keeps to herself. But they rarely see the deeper reasons, the invisible barriers that make connection feel complicated, even dangerous. Because before the silence, before the solitude, there were usually attempts, real ones, reaching out, trusting, opening up. And for many women, those efforts were met with betrayal, misunderstanding, or simply indifference. Some women were taught early on that their feelings were too much, that their needs were burdens. So they learned to mute themselves, to play small, to take up less space. When you grow up believing you are too intense, too sensitive, or too different, you learn to keep your distance. Not because you don't care, but because you care so deeply, and every time it ends in rejection, it cuts a little deeper. The message becomes clear: stay quiet, stay safe. Others carry trauma that no one sees, experiences that made them build walls instead of bridges. Maybe a toxic friendship that ended without explanation. Maybe years of being the one who always gave, always showed up, only to find themselves alone when they needed someone most. There comes a point where you stop trying not out of bitterness, but out of self-preservation. You start to believe it's easier to be alone than to be disappointed again. Then there are women who simply don't fit the traditional mold. Maybe they're introverted. Maybe their values or interests just don't align with the people around them. They're not broken, they're just different. And when you don't move through the world the way others expect, you're often met with confusion or discomfort. People keep their distance, and you start to believe you're too strange to belong. Motherhood can be isolating too. Many women lose their sense of social connection when their lives revolve around caretaking. It becomes harder to maintain friendships, to keep up with text threads or meet for coffee. And if they didn't have strong friendships before, motherhood can deepen that loneliness. They love their children deeply, but that love doesn't replace the need for adult connection. And yet, asking for that connection feels selfish or weak, so they stay silent. Mental health plays a role as well. Depression, anxiety, trauma, they all build invisible walls between people. You may want to reach out, but your mind tells you no one will care. You may try to show up, but the weight of your thoughts pulls you back. It becomes easier to isolate than to risk feeling like a burden. And the longer that isolation lasts, the harder it becomes to remember how to connect. Sometimes it's work. Responsibilities, life, you get busy. You tell yourself you'll make time later, but weeks become months and the gap widens. The friendships that once were fade, new ones never quite form, and before you know it, you're alone, but not by choice, just by circumstance. When a woman has no friends, there is almost always a reason, and it's rarely laziness or selfishness or coldness. Most of the time, it's just pain, accumulated pain, unseen pain, and survival strategies that have become habits. She's not weak, she's protecting herself the only way she knows how. But even then, even after all the disappointments and closed doors, there's still a part of her that hopes, that wants to believe connection is possible, that maybe one day someone will see her, not just the surface but the story behind it, and stay. That hope is quiet, but it never fully dies. Because no matter how many barriers there are, the heart still longs to be understood, to be chosen, to be loved. And so, even if she walks alone now, that doesn't mean she always will. There comes a moment, after all the silence and all the searching, when you realize that maybe the friendships you longed for, the kind you thought you were supposed to have, don't have to look the way the world told you they should. For a woman with no friends, that realization can feel both heartbreaking and freeing. Because for so long, you might have believed there was only one definition of connection: the close, knit circle, the constant texts, the shared vacations, the laughter in group photos. And when you didn't have that, it was easy to believe you had nothing at all. But connection doesn't always come in a picture-perfect package. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's scattered, sometimes it grows slowly in unlikely places. The truth is, friendship isn't always found in people who look like your reflection or live right next door. Sometimes it begins with a stranger online who shares your story. Sometimes it's the gentle smile of a neighbor who always says hello, even if they don't know your name yet. Sometimes it's a moment in a support group, a late-night message from someone who just gets it, a passing conversation that reminds you you're not invisible. These connections may not become lifelong friendships, but they are real and they matter. When you let go of the rigid idea of what friendship should be, you make space for what it could be. You stop measuring your worth by the size of your social circle and start noticing the small ways love and understanding show up in your life. A kind word, a thoughtful comment, a moment of being seen, these are not lesser forms of connection. They are the threads that slowly stitch a woman back together after she's spent years feeling unseen. And maybe the first place you begin is with yourself, because by now you've learned how to sit with your own silence, how to enjoy your own company, how to be your own comfort. That's not loneliness, that's self-trust. And when you build a foundation of self-trust, you start to attract people who meet you with the same energy. Not people who drain you or need you to shrink, but people who see you exactly as you are and choose to stay. But it takes time, it takes patience, and it takes the courage to believe that your story isn't over just because this chapter is quiet. You may not be surrounded by friends now, but that doesn't mean you're incapable of forming them. It just means the timing or the circumstances or the people weren't right. And that's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Some connections don't last. Some never quite begin. But none of that makes your desire for friendship any less valid, or your ability to experience it any less possible. Sometimes finding your people means trying again, slowly, carefully, with wisdom you didn't have before. Maybe it means joining something new, a class, a group, a space that aligns with who you are now. Maybe it means being open to the quiet souls, the ones who also walk alone, who are just as hungry for real connection as you are. You don't have to announce your loneliness to the world. You just have to remain open to the idea that your story isn't done unfolding. You also don't have to wait until the perfect people arrive to live your life. You can build joy right where you are. Make memories with yourself. Dance alone in your kitchen. Travel if you can. Create beauty even if no one else sees it. When you live fully without waiting to be chosen, you reclaim your power. And ironically, that's often when connection finds you, when you're no longer chasing it, but simply living as the most honest version of yourself. So maybe your friendships don't look traditional. Maybe they're not loud or long, lasting or full of constant plans. Maybe they come in brief, tender moments. Maybe they're just beginning. That's still something, that still counts. You are not forgotten. You are not too late. You are not beyond reach. Your life is still unfolding, and connection is still possible. It always has been.